Welcome to the new episode of our podcast on the spot, zooming in the world. Today's hot topic is the new Indonesian cabinet that just sworn in, and the president on Sunday, and the new cabinet, a gigantic 53-member cabinet on Monday. And we have a great honor and pleasure to host today Dr. Dinna Prapto Raharja, better known as Dinna Wisnu, as one of the leading foreign policy experts and commentators in Indonesia. So she joined us from Jakarta. Thank you so much for kindly accepting my invitation.
Thank you, Jovan.
Well, I would appreciate, before diving deeply into the expected consequences of both internal and external of the new Indonesian cabinet, I would appreciate if you can educate us a bit about the Indonesian political system, because it's peculiar. In a way, it's closed for party outsiders, in presidential wise. So please, the floor is yours.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for having me. It's important that we get to know each other, the two countries, Serbia and Indonesia. So Indonesia's political system is basically presidential system, but we have gone through various phases in our history that we cannot quite say it's a pure presidential system. So it's rather something in between. How is that so? In the past, our president, Indonesia's president, has to get mandate from the Consultative Council, which consists of parliamentarians, members of parliaments from all political parties, plus the regional representatives. And whenever there's inauguration, they should be the speaker of the Consultative Council who gives the mandate. Now, when you noticed the 20th October inauguration process, it was also still led by the speaker of the Consultative Council. But because the president nowadays is directly elected through election, technically, or supposedly, politically, it's not dependent to political party composition. It doesn't have to be the one who win the most majority. So our system is not first past the post, but rather a proportional representation system. But what is unique about our proportional representation system today to allocate seats of the election is that we have open list system, which means the member of parliaments who got elected in the House of Representatives should have good relationship with the constituents, but also at the same time got approval from the political party to get the seats. So during the last election, 2024, we have a very big ballot because we have to choose for ourselves, whose name from the political candidates that we choose. So we don't just choose the party, but we choose names. Which is
fortunately, we know in the past that people were dying during the counting of votes, in Indonesia. So it was really,
exactly. Yeah. It can be very tiring, right? And another interesting fact is that nowadays our election is simultaneous between the presidential election and the legislative elections. So in the past, it was separate days, different days. Now, how is this important? Because there's a coattail effect. If the president is winning popular votes, most likely the political parties from the president also will win the majority. But what's interesting in the last election, 2024, it's not necessarily the case. So there's a divided support. Mm-hmm. But how did Prabowo Subianto, now the president of Indonesia, won the election? His political party was not the party with the most seats in the parliament. In fact, it's the third rank among the political parties.
For him, didn't transfer to the great extent to his party, Gerindra, Great Indonesia.
Exactly. Yes. But what's interesting is that his approach is to build a coalition Now, this is the interesting part. It's not pure presidential system. He builds a very big coalition to bring him into triumph as a president. So there are many political parties supporting him in the parliament. In fact, if you total the number of seats from the political party that support him, the number would outnumber the top number one party who wins the seats, namely PDI Perjuangan, which is the party of Megawati Soekarno Putri, which is now left behind, not included in the cabinet position, and seemingly going to play a role as an opposition. So,
but if I may ask you, just I think it's interesting, the nominating procedure of the president, because it depends on the parliament, on the composition of the parliament, because certain percentage of MPs must support the ticket in order to be candidates. I think that's interesting.
Yes. Because in the 2017 law, there's a requirement that the party who can nominate a candidate needs to have a total 20% seats in the parliament, which is why PDI Perjuangan had their own candidate. And then the other political parties can form a coalition to nominate. And the system in Indonesia, if you nominate, you have to nominate a couple. So the president and vice president. So it's not a split ticket like in the Philippines, for instance. But the individuals doesn't have to be from the same political parties. It's an agreement among the coalition of parties, basically.
Mm-hmm. But it's very interesting because there were 3 tickets in the last presidential elections in Indonesia. But it's interesting who Prabowo, the winner, chose as his running mate, and it's a son of former President Jokowi. So President Jokowi practically, even though he didn't formally endorse any ticket, he didn't endorse the candidate of the party who nominated him twice for being the president.
Exactly, and this become a fiery polemics just before the election and immediately after the election, because the eldest son of Joko Widodo actually didn't qualify to become a candidate. According to the law, the minimum number of, the minimum age of a presidential candidate is 40, and he is 37 years old. So somehow there is a coalition presenting this case to the Constitutional Court and saying that this requirement is against the Constitution, which is, and then they revise the requirement, doesn't change the 40 years, but then add a sentence there that that person or 40 years old or incumbent of elected official at the local levels, which makes Gibran qualified.
Yes, because he was a president of one of the municipalities. Yes,
he was the mayor in Solo. It's there where they come from. The family comes from.
Yes, and after that, the president of the constitutional, after that decision, the president of the Constitutional Court resigned.
Yes, exactly. That was also another story, because the chief of the Constitutional Court is the uncle of Gibran.
Yes, no, I know that. Well, let's move now to just briefly maybe to the election campaign. What were the main topics, and what was the Prabowo's electoral platform, and maybe a bit about his background, let's say controversial background, and he was Suharto's son-in-law and chief of the special military forces.
He runs on a promise that Indonesia would have to fight first and foremost the national interest of Indonesia, and that there are foreign interests out there who may try to suppress Indonesia's gaining from the international arena. I guess that's the main issue that he raised internationally. Another interesting aspect of Prabowo is that his approach was very much engaging to the young generations. He used a lot of platforms, digital platforms like TikTok and Instagram, to appeal to the youth. And he and Gibran, yeah, make different kinds of, we call it gimmicks, right? Very funny story, sometimes stupid story, and then dances, and call himself a gamoy grandpa. Gamoy is like, what do you call that? Very dancey kind of grandpa. And at that time, there was also another controversy because one of the political party that used to be known as the Party of the Youth, PSI, and this party supposedly was urban and full of young people and renewed political parties. Suddenly, the leadership was toppled by the youngest brother of Gibran. So at that moment, the campaign changes as well, because Kaisang, the brother of Gibran, also came up with billboards and stuff showing the picture of him and Joko Widodo, and says that politics should be fun, politics should be playful. So we never quite talk about anything substantive other than that thing, national interest should be number one. And then the second thing that his campaigning was free meals for children, because the attention was so many Indonesians nowadays got stunting problems. So the solution from the Prabowo couple, the duet, was free meals. So that was it.
Free nutritious meal at least once a day for children and expectant mothers. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
So so I assume that he repeated some of these points during his inauguration speech, and there was just in between, there is I think the longest lame duck period in between the elections and the new administration. It was like more than 8 months long, since the elections took place in mid-February, and the inauguration took place just 3 days ago. And there was a reshuffle of the government immediately, and I think that the idea was to secure the continuity of the Jokowi administration and some kind of Jokowi's legacy. So some of the representatives of the parties that were not part of the government, but that supported Prabowo in the presidential election, they joined the cabinet already in February.
Yeah. Honestly, that was the longest period of waiting, with full of uncertainty here in Indonesia, between the announcement that Prabowo wins, which was just one day after the election was done on the Valentine's Day. There was an announcement that basically he won a landslide, 58%.
Yeah.
And then the number hasn't changed at all. A month later, when the election commission announced it, it's still the same. And since then, Joko Widodo as a president has done so many surprising things. One of the things was the one you mentioned, reshuffling of the cabinet. So there are ministers whom we know not necessarily have any relevance in knowledge to the issue that they are handling, but they suddenly become cabinet members, become ministers. And he did it in July, in February 2024, and then so just a few days after the announcement of he wins on the 21st of February, and then the other one on the 18th of July. And I think the interesting note there is that Agus Harimurti Yudhoyono, the son of former President Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono, yes, he became a minister. Finally, after many years of people here rejecting his rise as a presidential candidate, because he did run for presidential candidate and then ended up becoming vice president candidate, and he lose. Now he become minister. And then there was notably some issue of some corruption from other ministry, and which was used as a reason why Joko Widodo tried to change the minister. And in addition to that, there was the issue of IKN, the new capital of Indonesia. That was also very big story here.
So, John, the moving capital to Kalimantan or to Borneo.
To Borneo, which is the polemic. The polemic there is the cost and the speed and the transparency, or the lack of transparency, I should say, of how are these things financed so fast and become so grande, and what's the agenda? Why President Joko Widodo insists so much of having this done before Prabowo's inauguration?
Yeah, it's his legacy. It's about his legacy. So, speaking about Prabowo and his inaugural speech and his electoral platform, I would say this is some kind of combination of economic self-sufficiency and especially related to the handling of resources, natural resources, and this sound social program, the combination of these two. Can you agree with that, or?
The speech highlights programs to protect Indonesian resources, natural resources in particular, and to make sure that they use the word downstreaming. I mean, Prabowo used the word downstreaming, which means basically trying to create value added at home instead of exporting the natural resources abroad. And then the other programs that he mentioned was to be more self-sufficient on energy and food. Those are the two big ones. And then he also mentioned about anti-corruption, the importance of anti-corruption. He also mentioned about the important legacies that the previous presidents have contributed to the nation. And he basically sends this signal that he is a very dedicated individual with long track records of trying to give the best to Indonesia, and he will serve for all people, even for those who didn't vote for him.
So there was a message of unity. And going back to the new government, the 53-member big government, and there was a limitation till May that limited the number of members of the government to 34, but it was scrapped in May. So what were the reasons? Maybe to keep everyone happy and to involve everyone, to be able to involve so many actors. And so we experience some kind of consensual democracy now in Indonesia. And as you mentioned, there is practically no opposition to this cabinet. Either the parties are represented or in the cabinet, or they are not opposing or supporting this government. And how long this situation could last, how such a big government could be efficient and durable. There are already some comments that probably already next year there will be another reshuffle, maybe once Prabowo solidifies his power. So what's your view on that?
Actually, the main priority at this point is peaceful transition and to secure the practice of democracy in the sense of procedural democracy. It's a very, brittle process. It can be very tricky for democracy to sustain this process. During the election, the polarization was really strong. So it's, all sorts of law violation we think was happened, but if we cannot prove it in the court, then it's just gone. And I think one of the the reasons why political parties decided to just go with it, especially the opposition, is because, and also civil society decided to just wait and see, is because the risk is so big if you try not to accept the result. Not only the social cost will be so big, the economic cost will be also significant. And at this point of trying to get out from the impact of the pandemic, I think people need to learn, and especially the young generation, they need to also learn. They never seen how the pre-reform period before 1998 looks like. For people like me, it's so vivid that we depart somehow from what we imagine will happen, having more multi-party system, check and balance, and then presidential system that is responsible, transparent, and all. But for the younger generation, which is now a huge number in Indonesia, over 120 million people. That's a huge number. So you can imagine, if we cannot educate them well, then it's better to continue educating them before we take more abrupt actions. So in terms of the ministers, the array of ministers, you notice that basically there are people from the political parties. The very stark difference between this cabinet and Jokowi's cabinet when he first came into office, when Jokowi first came into office in 2014, is the number of coordinating minister.
Yeah, it's 7 now, it's used to be 4.
Yeah, expands. Usually we only have 3, and then when Jokowi Dodo took the second office, become 4, including, to include Luhut Binsar Panjaitan, which, if you know, Indonesian. Yes. Luhut is a very important political player, also a military man. Yes, and then now becomes 7. And you notice the 7 coordinating ministers are all heads of or chair of political parties. And in Indonesia, coordinating ministers actually do not have much budget or staff, because the goal is for having a coordinating ministry is to, talk across ministers under their portfolio and to direct, and then politically, most of the time, when they have to create presidential regulation or presidential instruction, it's playing a very important role there.
Yeah, to remove the obstacles, etc. Yeah.
Yes. So the one who connect with constituents like me, like the lay people, is the technical ministries. And you notice the technical ministries nowadays comprise a lot of people who are Prabowo's trustees and Gibran's trustees. So, and many of them come from the Jokowi's era, second period.
Okay.
These individuals are people approved by Gibran, whereas the new individuals whom you see very close to Prabowo, as of course approved by Prabowo. You also notice that a lot of ministries are split from 1 to 3. Like, for instance, let me give you an example: the Ministry of Education. Ministry of Education used to be 1 under Jokowi Dodo period 1, and then on the second period becomes 2. Becomes 2 and then become 1, because we try to merge, right, to make it more efficient. But now under Prabowo becomes 3. Now for high school and middle school, there's a different ministry than for university level and for culture. And then human rights and law used to be just 1 ministry, now becomes 3. Human rights, law, and immigration. Those are separate. So these are the example of, I think, in everybody's here is thinking about waiting for the 100 days.
Whether the health break loose. Okay, but on the other hand, I think that there is a continuation with the ministers who are dealing with economic development issues like investment, etc.
Like Sri Mulyani, I guess she gets, the Minister of Finance, Sri Mulyani, gets a lot of attention. Not only because she's been there since Yudhoyono's presidency. So this is an individual who basically know everything about Indonesian finance. And before this, she keeps saying that she's not going to go on with the new administration. But then suddenly she say yes. Now she has 3 vice ministers. And this is what's interesting, because the family members of Prabowo become the vice minister, among the vice ministers. So the logic here is that we need to keep the market sentiment positive. And I think it shows because everywhere the announcement of the cabinet was positive, and that there's a continuation, making sure that structural situation of the macroeconomy remains stable. There's not going to be any shock in the economic spending, for instance. That's what Sri Mulyani trying to portray. But of course, everybody's waiting 100 days.
Yeah. So now let's move to the topic which is the closest to both of us. It's foreign policy. There is a new foreign minister, who is Sugiono, who is one of the Prabowo's trustees. He has been following him for many years. He has been in his party, the deputy chairman of his party. He was his personal secretary, etc. And he is, I think, for the first time, a foreign minister for a long period. In 30 years, the foreign minister is not a career diplomat. He has a military and business background, and he was in Commission 1 in the parliament, in the Foreign Policy Commission. So he has some experience with that, but still, he's not from foreign policy field. And there are also some organizational changes. For the first time, there are 3 deputy ministers or in the foreign ministry. So what kind of changes are expected regarding the foreign policy? He is named as one of the Jedis, of Prabowo Jedis, and the ideological child. So it's having friends with everyone and anti-colonialism, etc. So are there any changes in foreign policy, Indonesian foreign policy, expected under the helm of Minister Sugiono?
I guess in terms of style, Indonesia would appear more active. Prabowo is a very passionate man in terms of visiting, talking directly with heads of states, and he speaks lots of foreign languages, very comfortable in his skin whenever talking about personal negotiation, tete-a-tete meetings, very confident. So my sense when Sugiono was appointed as foreign minister is to secure that, to prepare, to create conducive environment so that he can make sure all documents, all programs that Prabowo said needs to be prepared can be done. And the composition of the vice ministers is one from political party, the political party who didn't get any seats in the parliament, Partai Gelora, the Gelora Party, Anies Mata. Anies Mata used to be a leader also of Justice Party, which is a party that religious and linked to the brotherhood vision in Islam. So Anies Mata's position here, I would imagine, is linked to Prabowo's intent to become more active in Middle East issue. Middle East issue, lots of dimension, not just Israel-Palestine, but also the issue of investments, for instance, from Saudi Arabia, from Qatar, these countries interested to invest in Asia, and also on Hajj, for pilgrimage. Indonesia's interest, among the important national interests, is to send pilgrimage every year. And then the other one is Armanata Nasir. Armanata Nasir, or Tata, Pak Tata, is used to be one of the very close person to Retno Marsudi. So continuation of style and sort of like structure within the foreign ministry.
Clarification is the former foreign minister who was 10 years.
Exactly. Retno Marsudi was foreign minister for 10 years, and Armanata Nasir is one of the confidant of Retno Marsudi. And his specialization is multilateralism, based in New York for years. So you notice as an ambassador there, very fluent with groupings and international agenda through UN. I think this will opens the path for Prabowo to appear more on UN meetings and for UN agendas. And then the other vice minister is Hafaz Ugroseno. Hafaz Ugroseno is was the Indonesian ambassador in Germany, and he is really comfortable in his skin in Europe. So and he is also an expert on maritime issues. So I think in the multi-function thing, if Indonesia wants to move on with the agenda of downstreaming and being tougher to the EU, for instance, Hafaz will help lead the way. So you notice the composition is like that. So hopefully all these men work well together.
So from what you were saying, it looks that Indonesia will try to have a more prominent international role. And how will Indonesia continue to navigate this main geopolitical rivalry, especially in Indo-Pacific between China and the US, having in mind also the increasing economic and trade importance of China, but also trying to maintain some kind of security safeguards from the US.
Okay.
I just thought, I think, sorry, that we just saw this congratulatory notes coming from Biden and Chinese President Xi, and you can see some kind of difference. The Biden's congratulatory note was more like bureaucratic and diplomatic, and Xi's note was more like about common future, etc.
Yeah, I think the Indonesia's approach is to play more tactical approach. So short-term movements, playing by the perception of being, friendly to everybody. You will see that a lot. One of the things that you have to be aware whenever we talk about strategy, setting up strategy, it's not something that you can build one day and then expect it to go on for the next 5 years even, especially under a period like today where geopolitics is very dynamic. So you notice today, the news says that the new foreign minister is dispatched to represent Prabowo to the BRICS meeting. In the past, Joko Widodo said that Indonesia is going to join the OECD. But this suggests that Indonesia wants to also check out the other store and see how things are ongoing. At the end of the day, Indonesia also need to anticipate different kinds of scenarios if the U.S.-China relationship get any worse. And the other aspect I would like to highlight is that Indonesia's economy has been quite intensively related to China, not only for products that we buy, but also for production inside of Indonesia. So you can imagine, 80% of our economic activities would very much continue to engage with China. The US, I think Indonesia is paying a close attention to what's going on in the South China Sea. Indonesia is also restless about how China apply a new map for the South China Sea. But at the same time, Indonesia is also aware about the plans of AUKUS and Quad. So because it's still uncertain where things are on the defense and security issue, Prabowo as a military man, I think he would rather dig more information and develop more cooperative frameworks. I noticed that US and China both are very interested to speak some on the deeper level in the ADMM ASEAN Defense Ministers meeting, plus the East Asian Summit, the upcoming one. So I would imagine that everybody's still waiting, and clearly things are uncertain also in the US side, waiting for the election result. So we shouldn't judge too soon.
Mm-hmm. So, do you expect to have a bigger bilateral relations role for Indonesia with the new administration, or is still trying to use ASEAN mechanism. Just 2 weeks ago, the ASEAN summit plus other summits took place, including East Asia summit. But it looks to me that it lost a bit of importance in the East Asia summit. President Biden was absent. Of course, he had good reasons because of the elections as well. But also President Xi was absent, and so it looks like the main star of the East Asia summit was in India's Prime Minister Modi.
In relation to ASEAN as an institution, as an organization, I think Prabowo is not going to use it as the only forum. How often will he engage those leaders through ASEAN? It remains to be seen. But my feeling, he is more comfortable at the bilateral negotiation. So as you notice, his gesture to mention everyone's names, the heads of states from ASEAN by name, complete names even during his inauguration day, shows that he's very comfortable talking to individually to all of them. So that shows that there's the potential that ASEAN mechanism may be too complicated for him to go through. But at the same time, he mentioned about the importance of Indonesia's identity as a non-bloc. Now, we have yet to see the long-term implications of this statement, because when usually if Indonesia's leader says we are non-bloc, there will be some kind of preparation on the ground also for engaging countries that are of this like-minded countries, either using it in the UN or for other multilateral fora. So ASEAN member states may then be brought into a bigger, larger multilateral fora for that purpose.
And you mentioned that we are waiting for the results of the US elections. So do you think that President Prabowo would prefer one of the two candidates, that he could better cooperate with one of the two?
I think he would hope to work closely with Trump. But either way, actually, politically, Indonesia's bilateral relations with the US will remain stable. The only disruption that you may see is when the US decided to become more forceful to China in the area that's very close to Indonesia. I think that will be the tipping point.
You also mentioned BRICS summit, which is taking place now, and they do special envoy there. So, what is the expectation of the current important global player, and especially from the board?
Okay, if the agenda is to go on with what Joko Widodo highlighted, sort of the downstreaming of the mining sector, and then Prabowo's desire to sort of like more protection for our food and energy, then BRICS offer more rooms for that to happen. And I think political parties that support Prabowo is gearing towards that direction. They sort of like seen this opportunity of, engaging with unfinished products in BRICS will be more beneficial to Indonesia rather than going through OECD, whose institution and mechanisms are already established. So we'll see.
Okay. Thank you so much for your deep insights about Indonesian internal and the foreign policy. And I wish you every success in your future endeavors.
Thank you so much for inviting me to do On the Spot. Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you.